I am ready for the reception right now. But before that, it's my great pleasure to welcome to the stage Miss Roseann Bayne.
So, good afternoon, everybody. So we're here for the next 10 minutes to actually lead off from the brain piece that we just ended with. And it's missile launch, controlling my emotional triggers. Now, we all have emotional triggers. They're normal. What's abnormal is when in leadership we allow those triggers to actually become hijacks. So, if you twitch a little when someone comes late to a meeting with a hot coffee from, Dunkin' Donuts, that might be a trigger. And if we go to the brain and we say, all right, 3-part brain as taught by Dr. Dan Siegel, we're going to say here that my forearm is my brainstem, and my brainstem is my fundamental survival, my startle, my breathing. My thumb is my limbic system, the seat of my emotions, my motivation, my bonding. But the majority of your brain is your cortex. It is your thinking, your IQ. It is where you say, hey, risk versus reward, higher order thinking. But the problem is it doesn't fully develop until about the age of 25. And that brain weighs about 2.7 pounds, but it uses 21% of your body's resources, your blood, your oxygen, your H2O. It's 21% to run that supercomputer. And unfortunately, when you have a hijack, those resources actually leave your brain, therefore leaving you kind of brainless. So if you think about it, you say, all right, if my brain's number one job is a survival organ, its job is to protect me. Well, what's it protecting me from? Evolutionarily speaking, it was protecting me from saber-toothed tigers. Unfortunately, our brains have not evolved, and now social and emotional triggers are having that same biological response. So something like, your spouse is snoring may put you into an amygdala hijack. And, we are born with these 5 hardwired fears, and you look at them, and 2 of them are about the container, about the body, the first 2. I don't want to die, and I don't want anything cut off, and I don't want anything broken. But the next 3 are all social emotional. It's my esteem, my belonging, and do I have choice? So do people like me? Am I part of the tribe? And I want power and control over my decisions. Well, you can take that and then just superimpose it on top of Maslow to say, all right, we have this triune brain, and now when we look at it, the base, the just fundamental piece is at the base. It's like, I need food, I need water. The next 3 parts of Maslow are all about the social emotional. Do I have safety here? Am I loved? Do I belong? Do I have esteem? Do people think I'm good at anything? Or something bigger than self? And when you have that, you can finally reach full potential. But our full potential is sometimes, hampered by our childhood. So we have patterns in our life that we developed in childhood that might not serve us well as superintendents or leaders. And we have to work to overcome them to be the best leaders we can be. So for instance, if you're a perfectionist and that worked really, really well for you through school, as a superintendent, your limbic system might say, you're the only one that can do that right. And then you'll overwork yourself because a perfectionist might say, I'm the only one who can do that. And that is part of our negativity bias. In order to protect this container, our brain is set up with a strong negativity bias. And humans give a lot more weight to negative experiences than positive. So negatives that come in stick like Velcro, and then positives that come in stick, like Teflon. So take a look. 6 great things happening in your district, and your heart's saying, oh, superintendent, look at these 6 great things you've done. And your brain's like, wait a second. One of my board members just said something negative. I just saw something negative on social media. And you focus on that. And you don't want to be the superintendent that's like, it's not a great wall. It's an all right wall. It's the all right wall of China. But negativity bias can do that to you. And negativity bias is strong. When you look at this particular pie chart here, those are the 6 elements that trigger your limbic system. Those are the things we're concerned about the most. And our brain is protecting our specific perspectives. So for me, for example, competency and autonomy are big pieces of my pie, where being included and safety are small. So what are your, limbic triggers? Because if you don't know them, you can end up here. And that is becoming hijacked at some of your most difficult times in leadership. So an emotional hijack isn't when you have a biological reaction because there's imminent danger or a threat. That's normal. A hijack is when you have that biological reaction with something that is insignificant and is not going to hurt the core. And you then actually are triggered into a point where you lose your thinking. And the reason is this: that limbic system does not know the difference between the saber-toothed tiger and a social and emotional threat. And therefore, insignificant issues, or we could say things like, if you have a phobia, a spider, all right? If you are afraid of clowns, and one walks into your board meeting. But anyways, emotional triggers and fear conditioning. Where do we get our unique fears? Well, it's really interesting because the research shows our first fears come from our mother's heartbeat. That we learn even in utero and when breastfeeding that, hey, when mom's heart's beating at like 70 beats per minute, life is good. But when it goes up to, 110, she could be particularly happy or particularly sad. And then you decide, am I going to have that as a fear or not? So one of the keys to leadership is this: self-awareness. Do you know your triggers? I didn't always know mine until Chris Todd sent me all the way to Canada. He thought I needed some help with emotional intelligence. And I learned there, especially like 8 years ago, that internal and external, that negative self-talk can actually trigger you. We have 50 to 70,000 thoughts a day, and 70% of them are negative. So self-awareness is recognizing your triggers, and then how does your body react to them? My first indication of a trigger is I get a hormonal flush, and I feel hot. And then I feel the blood go from my gut to my butt to my thighs. And you know what that is? It tells me, run. And I can't always run out of meetings, even though I want to sometimes. And that's why we have children who they lope from rooms, because their legs are telling them to go. So this is a great example of the things that happen when you get hyperactivated, when you have a trigger. So if you take a look at this, in addition to the issues with, cortisol going to your cortex and talking about adrenaline being pumped in, your body is preparing for fight or flight. Now, you could have all of a sudden, I just went to the bathroom, but now I got to pee or poop. Why'd that happen? I have to leave because I'm sweating. I'm not hungry anymore. But most importantly, it's good to remember this piece. This part, the cortex, that's where your learning takes place. We are designed for our learning and decision-making to actually shut down at times of threat. And that is because we're set up to say, hey, we don't want you to have a lot of options when the saber-toothed tiger's coming at you. You can't look it up on Google. You can't say, how do I do this on YouTube? The idea is you fight or you flight. And so when we look at fight or flight, and we had that chart with all of the physical reactions, it's important to know that when you or somebody else is actually hijacked, those physical effects last for approximately 18 minutes. So that 21% of resources that were in your brain are not there because it is helping you fight or flight by making you stronger and faster. And you'll notice freeze isn't up there. Freeze is hypoactivation. So when you move to number 3, self-regulation. If I'm self-aware, how do I regulate? What strategies can I use to control my emotions? And if you recognize and understand those emotions, then you'll have the power to control them. And a lot of us don't take the time to actually recognize and actually accept the things that are triggering us. So when I say to you, what are some strategies that you might use? All right, so number one, and I hate it to say it, exercise. Exercise and movement is the fastest way to interrupt an emotional hijack. What that does is it just put dopamine and endorphins back in where you've had the loss of resources. Drinking more water. Your brain is one of the only organs that doesn't store water. And therefore, dehydration leads you to say really crazy things. People have been diagnosed with dementia just from being dehydrated. Having an appreciation anchor, something physical that you touch and you put a positive memory to. Breathing. And a lot of people will be like, I'm not doing that mindfulness stuff. You can't make me sit in a circle and breathe with people. There's lots of other ways to force that oxygen back into your brain to take that 18 minutes of a hijack and bring it down to 4 or 5 minutes. Meditation actually re-engages your cortex, and it takes your limbic system off the idea of whatever the threat was. Stopping. Sometimes we tell kids, block that person that's bothering you. So if you can, block the people that are bothering you. Sleep. A 20-minute nap will actually reset your brain from an emotional hijack. When you were little, people used to say, count to 10. It'll make you feel better. It doesn't today because that is declarative for us and procedural. But what I do now when irritating people are near me is that I count back from 100 by sevens. And forcing gratitude. Because of all the negatives, you actually need to say, I'm going to put positive things in my brain. And the final one is up in the corner, and this is not just a snazzy, fashion accessory. Tactile is a great way to interrupt. As you can imagine, things that are coming into contact with your palm also go directly to your brain. So these are called just acupuncture rings. I have as many adults as students using these. And you just simply have it on your finger, you're rolling it. Doesn't look that odd, it's kind of covert. And this can also interrupt and or stop an emotional hijack. So, got a whole backpack full of them. If anybody's interested, you can see me later. So this is just a quick way to say, to be the best leaders possible, you'll want to know your triggers and then figure out how am I going to avoid them. Thank you.